Koei, even to this day, hasn't really done much when it comes to developing their own turn-based RPGs. Back in the 80s and 90s, they had always been known as a publisher of war strategy games, mostly in Asian settings. So when they developed and published Inindo on the various computers at the time, it was a bit of a surprise. In 1991, they released a remade version on the Super Famicom in Japan. They also localized and released the game in North America in 1993 for the Super Nintendo. Inindo is one of those rare attempts Koei made to branch out of their war strategy-defined game brand. But were they successful? In Inindo, you play as an Iga ninja whose village was destroyed in Oda Nobunaga's conquest of the region in 1582. Your goal in the game is to travel across Japan and undergo training to get strong enough to enact revenge on Oda Nobunaga. You can move across the maps very quickly in this game, which is something I wish more Super Nintendo games allowed you to do. The game gives you general directions on where to go, but chances are you'll get lost on the way and actually need to talk to residents of the various locations for better directions. It's a small thing, but it's nice when NPCs and towns in these games actually tell you useful information instead of useless things all the time. While getting lost in wide open areas can be fun in a lot of games, it can be particularly dangerous in Inindo, especially in the early game when you're stuck wandering solo and there are more powerful bandits or wandering warriors looking to steal your coin. Like any good game with open areas to explore, there are also very dangerous areas available to go to early on with far higher leveled enemies than you'd be ready for when you can first access them. The random encounters in Inindo take place on a very simple grid. You take turns with enemies moving and attacking. You can attack after moving too. The early game attack options are a close range attack and a long range attack. Different close range and long range weapons can be equipped to increase your attack power for both types of attacks. In addition, you will learn magic eventually, and items are really important for making Inindo a much more manageable experience. There are useful reusable items that can damage enemies or heal your party. There are also extremely useful one-use items you can buy or find. When you close the distance with an enemy, they'll stop using long-range attacks, so that can be a useful strategy for keeping your weaker backliners safe in a dangerous fight. Once you reach level 7, you're able to recruit up to 2 allies into your party from a large selection of available classes and subclasses. However, for the allies to join you, you either need to be strong enough in level or have earned enough trust from them. Trust can be earned by beating them in a fight, although this can also kill them. Or you can just talk to people numerous times or gift them items to gain trust. Some characters will warm up to you quickly if their goals align with yours, and others will attack you outright. One challenging aspect of this process is that characters like to move around to different towns just like your character does, so it can be a bit of extra work to recruit specific characters. As time passes, when you do actions that can earn their trust. One thing I think is really cool about Inindo that separates it from most RPGs is its historical mechanics, as the game takes place in a fictional version of Japan's Warring States period. This is what I personally define as the Koei touch. In fact, time is very important in Inindo. If the player doesn't kill Oda Nobunaga by the end of the year 1601, they lose. A lot of actions take time in the game, and how quickly a player can reach certain points of the game can also define which events will take place en route to the end of the game, and different kinds of enemies can appear. The daimyos in the territories you wander around in are plotting their own ambitions as time passes. They are waging wars or accumulating strength. It's possible to get hired by daimyos to spy on and sabotage their enemies. Doing these jobs earns their trust and can also get the player some additional gold. After a certain point in the game, it even becomes possible to enter the wars themselves as units on a grid-based battlefield that would look very similar to anybody who has played an 80s or 90s Koei war simulation game. It feels powerful to be able to affect the outcome of wars by sabotaging provinces or beating dangerous enemy generals that would oppose you in fights before the wars start. In fact, you're required to use a daimyo to conquer any province adjacent to Oda Nobunaga's capital to complete the game. The towns and various settlements can sometimes have bingo minigames that can be played to earn chips to trade for useful items like gifts or to earn trust with daimyos. If you have enough money, you can play the high-class bingo and exploit it to make tons of money early game to buy some great equipment. Even if the early game is much easier, Inindo is still a challenging game to complete if you're not using most of the mechanics. Inindo definitely distinguishes itself from other turn-based RPGs, but there is a lot about this game I don't like. I've made it a habit to try to insert a small sample of BGM that won't give me copyright issues into my videos for most of the games I talk about, but your ears will bleed if I do it for this game. It's definitely one of those games you mute and then put headphones on to listen to something better while you play it. If you aren't exploiting minigames for gold, be prepared to grind hard for it to afford expensive but practically necessary equipment later in the game. The open areas are cool, but I think there was a big missed opportunity by not making this game more open world. What I mean by that is that the game will specifically stop you from making progress at certain points unless you've done other things first. One example of several is that even if you're at a high enough level to influence a daimyo to attack a province next to Nobunaga, the game won't let you do it until a certain point in progressing through training. If I'm being honest, I wasn't too crazy about this game when I played it many years ago, and that hasn't changed much today, but it did feel good when I beat the game for the first time. Because you have close range, long range, magic, and item combat options, there is some decent depth to the combat. The variety of characters you can recruit can also change the overall gameplay experience too. Coming back to the game in 2024, I can appreciate the fairly open Japan overworld and the freedom to eventually choose party members, even if it can be difficult to get who you want. One of the recent more modern games I played that really made me think about Inindo was surprisingly Wandering Sword. I made a video about that game already, which I'll link in the description section below. I imagine that if Inindo were remade in 2024, a lot of the world exploration would feel like Wandering Sword's world exploration, except in Japan. The war simulation section was neat, but it was such a small part of the game for me that it never even stuck with me years later. I had even forgotten Inindo did it first, after I thought Suikoden's implementation of a war strategy minigame was so much cooler when I played that game for the first time. But an interesting key difference between Suikoden's war minigame and Inindo's war minigame is that Suikoden's war minigame is scripted as part of the story, while players had the freedom to choose which provinces to attack Oda Nobunaga from in Inindo. Inindo is a game I respect, but I still think games like Metal Max, even as a late generation NES game, and the Romancing Saga series were much better open world games for the time. Inindo was a very early Super Nintendo game, so the game wasn't taking advantage of the Super Nintendo's hardware as much as games made later in the console's generation. The game also didn't seem to garner too much buzz in either Japan or North America during its time, which is probably why we've never seen Koei Tecmo pursue a sequel or continue making turn-based RPGs. I do think Inindo has a lot of awesome potential for an eye-opening remake with its unique historical and time-based mechanics. I haven't even really seen any notable turn-based RPG made recently. But Koei Tecmo doesn't seem to be too interested in remaking its older games. I'd personally be shocked to see Koei themselves developing any turn-based RPG in 2024, let alone hiring an external developer to do it for them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.